the U.S. had also restricted the export of the most advanced NVIDIA chips to most countries in the world, actually. Those export restrictions had initially affected the Gulf states. The Gulf states wanted to see those export restrictions lifted. They wanted to be able to obtain the most advanced NVIDIA hardware. The U.S. is kind of trying to cement its influence and make sure that China does not have influence in that region.
The U.S. made a series of AI-related deals with countries in the Gulf that should have some pretty big implications globally. And here to help us break it down is Jeremy Kahn. He's the AI editor at Fortune. Hi, Jeremy. It's great to have you back on Pioneers of AI. 2 weeks in a row.
Hey, Rana. It's great to be back here again.
So we wanted to have you back on the show to break down some recent news coming out of the Gulf. And I'm particularly interested in what's happening there because I'm Egyptian. I grew up in Kuwait and Abu Dhabi. And I've just been so fascinated by how the region is investing heavily in AI. They've been doing this for a while, but it does feel like last week really solidified that. So let's first set the scene. President Trump took a 3-day trip to the Middle East where he visited Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. And he was also joined by some of the biggest tech leaders like Elon Musk, Sam Altman, and Jensen Huang. Why make this trip?
Well, I think for the U.S., this is an area where there is a lot of money and a lot of interest in investing, particularly in new technology. You have a lot of countries in the region that want to diversify their economies. It's particularly true of Saudi Arabia that wants to diversify away from oil. So I think, the U.S. and a lot of U.S. companies are looking at the Gulf as a good region to potentially gather funds.
You know what really strikes me, and I'm curious what your take on this is. So NVIDIA and OpenAI are already global companies. And, they could have struck these business deals with Saudi and the UAE anyway. Why did it take the U.S. president to broker these conversations?
Yeah, it's a good question. There is a strategic element and a kind of geopolitical element to what's going on here. The U.S. is sees itself as in this kind of AI race with China in particular. And the Gulf, just by virtue of where it's located and a lot of its history, has kind of been in between these two, sort of the West and the East, as it were, and has kind of played that position to its advantage. So I think, for the U.S., there's been this issue that they were concerned that some of the technology companies in the Gulf region were kind of close to China, were potentially going to use Chinese technology. The U.S. didn't want to see this happen. So some of what was going on here, and one of the reasons that you had such governmental involvement was the kind of geostrategic implications of this. There had already been this effort to get G42, which is this big UAE AI and tech company, not to use any Chinese infrastructure, not to use any Chinese chips, and to use American chips. But then, of course, there was this problem in that the U.S. had also restricted the export of the most advanced NVIDIA chips to most countries in the world, actually, because they were worried about the potential that this technology would kind of leak from these other countries to China. And those export restrictions had initially affected the Gulf states. The Gulf states wanted to see those export restrictions lifted. They wanted to be able to obtain the most advanced NVIDIA hardware. And so sort of for all those reasons, I think there was this, you had to have the government involved to make sure that not only that NVIDIA could strike this deal, but that those chips were going to be allowed to be exported to UAE and Saudi, and also to make sure that this was part of a wider kind of alliance where the U.S. is kind of trying to cement its influence and make sure that China does not have influence in that region.
Okay, so there were a lot of deals that were made last week, some energy-related, some manufacturing-related, and a lot of them AI-related, particularly in the UAE and Saudi. Can you walk us through some of these kind of commitments and their importance?
Sure. So Trump, when his traveling entourage of CEOs first went to Saudi Arabia, where they signed a deal with a brand new company that the Saudi government has set up called Humane, and they agreed that Humane was going to build out a data center, initially 500 megawatts, which is about the size of a lot of data centers that are now going up in the U.S. A 500 megawatt data center that would have access to initially 18,000 NVIDIA top-of-the-line GPUs. So that was sort of the first deal that was struck there. And then they went to UAE. And in UAE, they struck this kind of mega deal. The UAE is interested in creating this very large data center campus. And that deal is to supply ultimately 5 gigawatts of energy to this data center campus. It will eventually have, and the deal that was struck was for 500,000 NVIDIA GPUs. But this is one of these interesting aspects of this, again, for geostrategic reasons. A part of this agreement is that data center infrastructure is going to be kind of managed and operated on behalf of the UAE government by U.S. tech companies. So it's kind of an interesting arrangement.
Yeah. What's interesting, too, is it's reciprocal, right? Saudi Arabia's company Data Vault will invest $20 billion in AI data centers and infrastructures in the U.S., which is also very interesting.
Yeah, the U.S. tech companies are looking to build so much infrastructure in the U.S. that they really do need to find these external sources of funding. But of course, people have raised some interesting questions about that too, because if you have the Gulf nations, funding the development of these data centers and potentially owning the real estate on which these things are being built, there are some issues about control and what happens if the interests of the U.S. ultimately diverge from those of these Gulf nations. Is that going to cause a problem down the line?
Was AI security and AI safety part of the conversation at all?
So security, yes. Security was definitely part of the conversation. And if you look at the rationale for why it's going to be these U.S. companies managing this facility in the UAE, there was a lot of discussion about that was in order to make sure that these facilities were secure, that it was going to be difficult for people to hack into them and potentially steal the know-how, both either of the chips themselves, so the physical security of the facility, but also the technical know-how of how to build these large frontier AI models. Security, yeah, it was definitely part of the conversation, but safety less so. I think as a whole, safety is kind of taking a back seat here. Everyone's talking about trying to push innovation and progress as far forward as quickly as possible. And so I don't think there was as much discussion about AI safety.
One of the things that I find really fascinating, having grown up in the Middle East, is there's a mini race between these countries too. It's not like one monolithic, kind of Middle East. Actually, Saudi is in a competition with the UAE to establish itself as the AI hub. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so if you look up at the standing up of this company, Humane, in Saudi Arabia, which is funded by the Sovereign Wealth Fund from the country, the Public Investment Fund, it clearly is being positioned as a kind of rival to G42, which is the big company that the UAE has already established. And if you even look at what they're saying, one of the first things Humane is going to do is train a large language model that's very good at Arabic language. Well, it turns out that G42 already has an AI model that's very good at Arabic language. So yes, this is clearly like Saudi Arabia, not wanting to be left behind by its regional rival, the UAE, and trying to say, hey, we can be big players in AI too. We want to have a contender in this race to be at least the kind of dominant regional player when it comes to AI.
Well, we will definitely be watching this space. Thank you, Jeremy, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Rana. It's great to be here again.